So there are effectively two portals into an awakening experience. And effectively, we can enter through either the manifest of the Absolute, through the presence and love, or we can enter through the absence, through the peacefulness and stillness of the unmanifest Absolute. The most common is entering through absence, although a small percentage of people do enter through the love or through the manifest functioning of the Absolute. So the way that our identity is formed, and this is just one theory. In psychology, there are a number of theories of how the self is formed, how identity is formed. And this is a particular model that I find to be the most clear in relation to how I've experienced it and how I see it in students. And this starts with birth. As we're born, the infants are born to what's called a dual unity. And this is from the work of Margaret Mahler and some others. And this dual unity, the baby doesn't realize that it's differentiated, that it's a separate individual. It feels the oneness, it's in touch, and the oneness is all it knows. I know in holding my children when they were born, there's just an undividedness about them. So if you're, I think, sensitive, you can feel that unity that they are abiding in. It's not the same as an awakening, because for an awakening, we've come from a sense of identity, a sense of feeling separate and distinct, and we're entering back into the unified field. So we're doing it from separation. So the baby wouldn't be considered to be awakened. They're simply in an undividedness with particularly the presence and the love functions of the Absolute. And over time, the baby begins to realize the hunger, the pain, the discomfort, the neediness is all inside. And the resolution, the solution comes from the caregivers outside. So this begins to establish a sense of identity in the body boundary. Okay, what's inside the skin and beneath, that's me. That's what I can feel. And what's outside is other. So it begins a real rudimentary breakdown of the unity of I'm this individual, I'm this body, I'm this self. And then we take on a sense of self when we're interacting with our caregivers. Our caregivers can never be perfectly attuned to children. It's not possible because of their distractions, the demands on adults, and also their own sense of self and neediness and all the different psychological processes working in them. So all of us as children are going to be misattuned by our caregivers, not intentionally necessarily, but just through the common occurrence of humans. And so as our caregivers recognize and relate to us, they begin to recognize in us qualities that they find beneficial, behavior they find to be good. And so we'll be told, oh, good job, you've done that well, you're really good at this, you're really good at that, you're not so good at this other thing. So we begin to recognize, okay, I'm this goodness, I do these things well. And the things we don't do well, we tend to discount. And so as we meet other people, we want them to see and mirror the things we think we're good at. I'm this good person, I'm the smart person, I'm athletic, I'm good in all these ways. That's what I want you to see and reflect back. And when someone does, we feel seen. And the common expression is, they get me. And really what they're doing is they're just picking up on the projection that we're doing. We want them to see this side of us. We're tailoring our language and our presentation so they arrive at the conclusion we want them to. And when someone mirrors something back to us that's different than how we see ourselves, our self-identity, then we feel that they don't get us. They don't see me. they're not appreciating me. They're seeing something else. And those people we tend not to want to be in a relationship with. So as we turn away, part of what happens, turn away from the absolute, from the presence and love as toddlers, we begin to form a core wound. And we elect to turn away from the presence and love and turn towards the caregivers, the birth family, the society. We understand, I need these people to live, to survive. I need to invest in them. I need them to care about me, to keep me alive. So our survival instinct is tied into this turn away. And yet, interestingly, each of us creates a story that we were rejected by presence, by love, that we were thrown out or we were pushed out, when in fact we're the ones that turned away. And this story of our being rejected is that something is fundamentally flawed in me. I'm broken in this significant way that the absolute rejected me. Of course, it's false. We turned away, but we hold it that we got rejected. And that starts creating that core wound, which is that piece in you when you feel a sense of worthlessness, when you feel a sense that, I'm not good enough, I don't measure up. If someone treats you badly, well, of course they did, because I'm this way. In effect, we see ourselves as broken, damaged, worthless. Some people have a story, they're unlovable, they're bad, they're worthless, they're helpless, hopeless. You can fill in the blank, but it's some story that we believe it starts from this core wound. And this is what we most want people to not see. I don't want you to see this core wound. I want you to see this functional behavior, the stuff I'm good at, the good behavior. And so we go through life trying to keep hidden this sense of valuelessness or worthlessness. And we try to have people see the goodness in us. And over time, both therapeutically, we can work this material, the core wound, and also spiritually, we end up working it. We work through the layers, eventually down to the core wound to work. And we write it. One of the ways we keep the self-image, the sense of self in place, is through self-talk. Again, I mentioned our likes and dislikes. A lot of that is what keeps me oriented to me. And we reference that as though this is a universal rule. I'm this way, this is how I am, and that's it. And in fact, it's not true. It's based on situation and responsiveness. There's all sorts of components that influence our behavior. So we see our self-identity, our sense of self, again, through who we take ourselves to be. This also is reinforced by the feedback we get. If someone is giving you positive feedback, that goes to the ego structuring. Okay, they see me, I'm okay. If we get negative feedback, we feel they're seeing and witnessing the core wounding, which we don't want to acknowledge. And so we reject their assessment of us. And we think of them as someone who's not a good person, we don't want to be around. So all of this combines into having a sense of self. This recipe, all these pieces come into who we take ourselves to be. And over time with spiritual practice, particularly meditation, particularly these absolute meditations, we're making contact with the source that isn't conditioned. It's an unconditioned quality. It has no birth and death. All of us, our body, all of our stories have a birth and death. There's going to be a time that it ends. And that will be the end of what's conditioned. So we're orienting here to what's unconditioned, and then we're comparing what's conditioned against the unconditioned. So we're spending time in the absolute. then we're noticing our behavior, and we're looking at the patterns, and can we change the patterns to more accurately reflect what we know to be true from our spiritual journey. The lens of truth is one of the most important practices that we do, that we apply. We apply it to really understand and be truthful with ourselves. It isn't that there's an ideal. There isn't a finish line in spiritual journey. It's a process. In traditional Buddhism, the school of Buddhism called Yogacara, there's an understanding of the 8 levels of consciousness. I have a new book I've just turned into my editor, which I go through the 8 stages, 8 levels of consciousness. The 8th's called the Alaya Vijnana. That's the storehouse consciousness. And it's believed that as karma is created, good or bad karma, there are seeds of karma that are deposited into the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. And as we practice, we come in contact with these good and bad karmic seeds called biju. And as we practice, particularly doing meditations like the absolute meditations, we're converting the negative or bad karma to neutral or good karma. So there's a benefit that's happening. And as we behave in the world congruently with our understanding, we're converting negative karma, we're converting negative karma, and we're adding good karma to the storehouse. And that becomes part of our work. And interestingly, when we first encounter absence of self, when I mentioned earlier, I ask who you are, and you turn in, there's just simply no answer. I don't know who I am. Rather than having a sense of relief or even joy about it, we normally can feel a sense of loss. We don't know who we are. There can even be a tone of hopelessness, a kind of defeat, a kind of inner depression or sadness. And I suspect it's because when we're with absence of self, we're also open to the core wound. So we don't have a sense of self, but we can feel that really deep belief, that conviction that I'm fundamentally flawed or broken. And so this is part of what we get used to with the absence of self. We stay with it as long as we can before we assert the sense of self. And over time, we gain more comfort, more ease in being with absence of self, of not knowing who we are. And we begin to have comfort and allow that to land and can move into that territory. At the same time, we're working with absence of self, we can begin to feel the personality is stale. It feels outdated, like it's an old pair of shoes that no longer quite fit. It's that kind of a sense.